Well, how common is it to experience some form of anxiety or depression?
Yeah, it's really common. About half of us are going to actually sort of meet some criteria or condition to actually seek treatment for depression or anxiety. I mean, millions and millions of Americans at one point or another have experienced these things and needed support for them. So this isn't a tiny percentage of a population. It's fairly common.
So we've been talking about authenticity. So what does self-acceptance feel like?
What does self-acceptance feel like? Yeah, it's interesting because that's a real sort of it's very abstract, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think the idea of how self-acceptance feels, I think if there is a sense of self-acceptance, I think there's a way that we interact in relationships that's really different. I think, back to your point about authenticity, there's a way that we can maybe be more genuine. We can feel more present and in the here and now because we're not too focused on the future, being anxious and worrying about what someone may say or do in response to us. We're not dwelling in the past. We're just actually really living in the here and now. And being able to take risks, being able to pursue things that we want to, be the kinds of people we want to be without feeling guilt or shame. I mean, I think those are key components to self-acceptance.
So it's not really that you're taking all the bad stuff away from you, but it's more just realizing that you have the bad stuff.
Yeah.
And just kind of managing it.
That's perfect. And there's a really interesting, it's kind of a skill that's talked about in sort of the counseling world, and it's called radical acceptance. And so what that tries to cultivate is that sometimes there are things that go on in our lives that feel really unacceptable and they feel really terrible, and tragedies can happen to us. We can find ourselves in terrible circumstances and it feels really unfair, or it feels really we can just be really frustrated and angry and upset and sad that we're actually in the midst of this particular situation. So of course, when things are really hard like that, we don't want to accept that that's our reality. But it can be really kind of a source of a sign of wisdom if we actually just radically, and that's where the word radical comes in, sort of radically accept that this is our situation. And if we can move to a place like that, we generally can move past kinds of the mental health stuff that goes on, the worry, the sadness, the hopelessness, and just to actually make peace with what's going on, so that we can just begin to kind of look at it more objectively and just find ways to continue moving on.
What are some things that you can do to support other people you see suffering?
As someone who just is a friend or family member that's worried about a particular person?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of times the kind of isolation that people may feel, or the sense that they're alone in whatever it is they're going through, I think it's really important for that person to feel a sense of connection or a sense of shared experience that this can be maybe a normal part of life. And even though there's some people that have chronic conditions of depression or anxiety, and maybe it's lifelong and it lasts for years, and not to say that I don't want to trivialize it or minimize it, but
right.
The idea that again, it is okay that there are people that have these things that also would get treatment, they're on medicines, they're in counseling, they've learned a lot of skills and ways to just kind of manage their affairs in their lives and actually live okay and thrive. So I think, the kinds of things that aren't helpful is if people, again, are dismissive about their experience, minimizing to their experience, trivializing it. Those things generally are things that you want to avoid.
healthy coping mechanisms for anxiety and depression?
Question. So the kind of obvious ones that come to mind are things like, sort of like, we think of as like lifestyle kinds of choices, right? So that would be paying attention to our diets. What is it that we're eating? Are we getting adequate nutrition? Are we overeating? Are we restricting what we're eating? If the brain isn't getting sort of proper nutrition, it's not going to have the building blocks to kind of create the neurochemicals that are really important in fighting stress and making us feel a positive mood. There's a lot of, again, evidence to suggest that even though it's not causal, there's a correlation between people who eat, like, for example, a Mediterranean diet with like lots of grains, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, lean cuts of protein. People have lower incidence in those regions of mental health issues.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So there's no causal, it's nothing causal, but like in the area of like psychiatric epidemiology, there seems to be this relationship between the two. So it's really interesting. But things like, you know, high foods high in saturated fats or fried foods, foods high in sugar, you know, these kinds of foods probably aren't very helpful. They're okay in small quantities, but if that's like your main diet, it's probably, you're going to be less resilient to stress and other sort of, you know, psychological factors.
Right.
Fitness, exercise, and that can be something as little as 20 minutes, 3 or 4 days a week can be helpful. But again, research suggests that people who maybe have like even ADHD, you know, having a good long workout afterwards, if you have a task that you need to be highly focused on, you can actually get the same benefit as a medicine at that point. So exercise is really shoring up your ability to sort of tolerate a lot of thoughts that come and go. So if we get really good at being in a quiet place and focusing on our breath or a mantra or whatever your practice is, we can get really good at just sitting kind of in solitude and kind of being able to tolerate whatever it is that comes our way.
Right.
So that's a really great practice. And again, like things like social support, like just being with other people, getting connected to animals, to pets, any hobby that brings you joy, like or gives you some meaning, it's absolutely something people should be engaging in.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
It's been
thank
a
you,
great-
Nick. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.